What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Lakers Central. I'm Alex. That's Vinay, and we're joined by special guest Jovan Buha, Lakers beat reporter from The Athletic. He's going to give us the inside scoop on what's going on with our Lakers. So, Jovan, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Good. And Vinay, how are you doing, man, after you had that VIP access to the game the other night?
No, it was very good. I fully understand now why everybody's shooting percentages, well, almost every non-Lakers shooting percentages have skyrocketed after sitting in that game. It is. I mean, I have season tickets, but so I've been in an arena that's completely full, and I'm sure Jovan's probably done the same in terms of just sitting in games. But it's an experience, man. There's like less than 100 people inside that arena as the game's going on, including like staff and the players themselves. It's nuts for it to be so desolate. But otherwise, I'm doing good, man. It was an awesome experience.
And you just had to drop that you had season tickets also. Like you're just gonna keep bragging to all the fans out
No,
there, man.
I'm invested in. I'm invested in this team. Folks need to understand how invested in this team. It's not just the years of watching the Lakers. It's also a financial investment in the success of this team.
Yeah, whatever. You're part of the 1%. So, Jovan, man, well, welcome to the show. Like I said, man. So, look, the Lakers have lost their last two games, but they're 22-9 overall, and by all standards, they're probably doing pretty well. I tweeted earlier the three of the other four, Final Four finalists, the Celtics, the Heat, and the Nuggets, currently combined were 44 and 44. The Lakers are way ahead of schedule versus those other teams that were deep in the playoffs with them last year. But as you know, Lakers Twitter likes to freak out when we drop a few games. Anthony Davis is out for what, the next 4 weeks or so? Just 50,000 foot view. What does the team look like right now from your perspective? What's going on kind of behind closed doors? Are they concerned? Just what perspective can you give us from your seat?
So I actually just wrote about this. I asked Kuz and KCP last night about seeding because I think the seeding question is very relevant right now, where the Lakers dropped to the third seed by virtue of not having the tiebreaker with the Clippers. So this is the first time that they've been the 3 seed or lower this season since January 7th. So it's been almost month and a half, approaching 2 months of being a top 2 seed until now. And if you look at the next 6 games, I think there's a realistic chance they can go 3-3 or maybe even 2-4 in like a worst case scenario. I mean, you got Utah, who's won 20 of 22. They're a league best 13-2 at home. You got Portland and Golden State, who've already won at Staples Center. Dennis and AD played in both of those games. You got Phoenix, who's won 11 of 13. Like, this is a very difficult stretch. And then even Washington and Sacramento have had some feisty wins lately. I know both teams are struggling overall, but those games aren't like they're easy, but they're not bottom of the league easy. So I do think that this is a very trying stretch. But from a macro, I guess 50,000 or 50,000 feet view of the team, I think nobody's panicking. Everybody, like KCP said it last night. Regardless of what seed we are, we think we could beat anybody, and like our goal is just winning a championship. And doesn't matter what seed we are, we have to go to the playoffs and beat whoever's in front of us. And Kuz said a similar thing of like, we know that regardless of seeding, we're probably going to have to go through the Clippers or the Jazz or both to get to the finals. And at the end of the day, home court advantage isn't what it used to be with this weird season and no fans in the arena. So I think that. I think there's a level of frustration with this team just because they don't like to lose 2 in a row. That was the mantra going back to last season. And, they've lost 2 in a row. They've lost 3 of the last 4. And, there's a chance that they continue to lose more games, coming up. But I think from a macro perspective, you can't help but feel optimistic given what they've gone through. And for them to still be in the position that they're in, I think, I wouldn't worry too much. Now, if the 80 thing lingers and this becomes a rest of the season type thing, that's when the concern starts, right? Because, I don't think they can win a championship with 80 at 50%, 70%, whatever he's going to be at. So that's where my concern would kick in. But aside from that, as long as LeBron and AD are healthy, I like them against any other team in the league.
Yeah, I would say that like it seems as though the like during timeouts and stuff, like the body language of the team seems like they don't seem like stressed out when they're playing and stuff like that. And like the last couple of games when we see the cutaways during the timeouts, it's like AD's joking around with the other guys. He's helping Gasol out, looking at video and stuff like that. So it doesn't seem as though like the body language of the team reflects like a team that's like very pressure, like panicking or anything like that. But one of the things you mentioned was, like just being optimistic about what their chances are and stuff like that. And what I would say one of the things that's really kind of been an optimistic thing or a very positive thing is Kuzma's playing really well with AD being out. And we know that he can be good as a starter, but he's just been really good like all around. And even with Schroeder out, he's really stepped up. That Miami game, we have no chance if Kuzma doesn't have that first quarter that he has and kind of steps up the way that he did. What are you seeing like with the different guys that we have? And I know some guys have been up and down, but what are you seeing from Kuzma? What are you seeing from maybe some other guys on the floor during this stretch without Schroeder and AD that's kind of standing out to you?
Yeah, I thought Kuz, I didn't think it was his best overall game of the season because he's had double games. He's had games where he has multiple blocks and steals. So I think from like an overall impact standpoint, it wasn't his best game, but it was his best offensive game, right? Like season high 23 points. He led the way in that first quarter, kept them afloat as Miami got off to the hot start and felt like was going through pregame layup lines against the Lakers defense there for that, opening stretch. So I think Kuz, this is kind of what I think Laker fans want from him, right? Like, now AD's out, Dennis is out, step up and show us, that you can take a bigger role offensively. And, he hadn't really done that in the Minnesota or Brooklyn games, but he did that in the Miami game. But, I think the development with Kuz has been everything else. And, I think we talked about it last time I was on, but the defense, the rebounding, especially, like he's become like Dennis Rodman out there at times where he's just like gobbling up everything and offensive rebounds, which like, you can get, if you're playing in the front court and playing enough minutes, you can kind of get lucky and get 8 to 10 defensive rebounds. But when you're getting 3, 4, 5 offensive rebounds, like you're saving possessions, you're having an impact on the game. So I think Kuz's just overall development has been a really positive storyline for the Lakers this season. Other guys I'm looking at, Trez finally, I think, had a good game. He had not, I felt, played that well in the Minnesota or Brooklyn games. I mean, basically got benched in the Brooklyn game. Like Frank talked about it afterward that he felt DeAndre Jordan, defended him really well and he didn't like that matchup. So, I thought he had a nice game. Alex continues to just do Alex things where, he's stepped up as a distributor. And Frank has talked about that Alex is basically the point guard now. It's him and LeBron. One of those two has to be on the floor at all times now, where that wasn't always the case when Dennis was playing. So I look at those three guys. KCP made some shots, which it felt like had been forever since that had happened. Wes sneakily almost had a double-double. Wes had 10 and 8 last night. Like he was contributing. The guy I've been a little disappointed in is THT. I looked at this as an opportunity for him to assume a larger role, especially with Dennis out. I was like, okay, there's no excuse for THT to not, have a bigger role and play better offensively. And that just hasn't happened. But again, he's 20 years old. He's in a second season. Like these are the growing pains that happen with the young players. So I would say like that, those are kind of the 4 or 5 guys that have stood out to me the most in this kind of stretch.
You mentioned the Lakers having to go through some combination of the Jazz, the Clippers, maybe even the Nuggets if they fully can get back on track. There are fans out there that think we need to add more to our bench, which is interesting to me because this bench is probably night and day better than last year's bench, right? Like last year's bench stepped up in the finals, but we didn't have a lot of faith, I think, in that bench. But this year with Schroeder, Trez, the emergence of THT, Caruso, as you mentioned, he's been really, really solid. They've got a good bench. But there are still people that think we need to bring in another big, particularly with Anthony Davis being out and whatever, lingering injury that he may have for the rest of the season, I'm of the belief that no matter what the Lakers do with their bench, tweaks or not, Anthony Davis needs to be damn near 100%, him and LeBron, in order for us to really be able to win this championship. I don't think there's nothing you can do if those two guys aren't close to 100%. Do you agree with that? Like, if AD is at like 80%, is this team still good enough to make it to the finals and win it?
I think so, just because, I felt like he wasn't 100% last postseason, right? Like he had different nicks, and it feels like he's never, like 100% or close to 100%. Like he's always, right. I feel like there have been multiple times this season where he's exited a game, Lakers Twitter is going crazy of like, what just happened? Did AD, there was a point earlier in the season, I thought he twisted his ankle, and like, it's just been different things with him. So I think it's just managing that. But I do think it potentially, lowers their regular season ceiling. And that was kind of the theme of, I had a story go up about an hour ago, so I don't know if you guys saw it, but I was essentially saying like, the Lakers have talked about all season, we have a target on our back. Like everybody gives us their best shot. Yep. Teams play harder. Teams make more shots against us. Like that's what comes with being the Lakers. That's what comes with being defending champs. And they knew that there was going to be some level of adversity this season. And really it hadn't happened until the AD injury. Like if you look at the first 25 games or so, things went pretty according to plan. Like they're the 1 seed for most of that stretch, best defense in the league, LeBron, MVP front runner. Like things were going really well. You couldn't really complain much aside from, the Pistons loss and like different things like that of just that happens during the course of the season. The past couple of weeks have been tough. AD's been out, Dennis, then and now health and safety protocols. The offense is just torpedoed. They're now 16th in offensive rating, which is just absurd to me. Like I know they've been bad offensively for a while, but it doesn't feel like the 16th best offense. So I think it's just interesting to see how they react to this adversity, because who knows, maybe LeBron just goes supernova for the next 6 games. They win 4 of them. And he clearly is the MVP, and we're having a different conversation in a couple weeks. So I'm really interested to see kind of how the next 2 weeks go, how Frank handles lineups, and what they can do, because the non-LeBron lineups this season have continued to struggle. They're going to not have LeBron on the court for 12 to 15 minutes, each game over the next 2 weeks. And I don't know how they're going to manage that.
Yeah, I'd say like without Schroeder, it is really, really tough for them to create some offense for themselves. I am surprised how difficult it's been. I think I'm probably in the same boat as you, Jovan, when you're with like THC, is kind of hoping that he would be able to kind of fill the shoes or be a stopgap to some degree. And he's struggled a lot. You did say something that me and Alex have been joking on a lot of the pregames. I don't know what it is, but there's always one obscure guy that just goes off against the Lakers that's in the opposing lineup, right? Like every single time. And we had, and I think I've been pretty good on calling on who it was. The second OKC game, I was like, it's going to be Kendrick Williams or somebody like that. And Kendrick Williams expectedly, takes off. I know before the Nets game, I specifically mentioned Luwawu Cabarrot. I was like, this guy's going to go off on us because the Lakers aren't going to defend him. And he ends up having like the greatest shooting performance of his life or something like that. And then last night we get like Kendrick Nunn, it's just like, and not to say that these guys aren't good players. It's just they clearly played like way above what their normal situation is. And I think this team is kind of aware that like you're going to get the best shot from the other team, like whether you're injured or not, like the other team doesn't care. Like they want to beat the Lakers, and we know that that's a big deal and stuff like that. But I guess one of the things that I'm like kind of curious to follow, and it's hard to do because we only go off the post game quotes. But do you think, like, let's say the Lakers do go 2-4 over the next 6 games, or they go 3-3, or just something that's not a winning record, like not 4-2 or better? Do you think there could be a situation where we start seeing some mounting frustration, or do you think that this is just something that'll just continue? They'll just kind of stay the course? Because one of the things I tried to mention is this: if this was a regular season, like a regularly scheduled season, the All-Star break would have happened last week, so they would have already had 2 weeks off to kind of recharge the batteries and stuff like that. And we're still 2 weeks away from the All-Star break even coming up. and obviously with the consolidated season and whatnot. So it's like it seems like February is always considered, or like late January is considered like the dog days of the NBA season. That's what I've always heard, and it seems like the Lakers are trying to make their way through it, but it's not easy. It's very hard to do that when you're missing two of your best three players. Do you think something will eventually happen? Do you think LeBron will like say something about it, or do you think they'll just kind of continue not panicking and rolling along, as it relates to like what their identity has been so far?
I think if they have a 2-4 stretch, 3-3, I think like that might just be like kind of whatever. But like 2-4, 1-5, that I could see LeBron saying something. I mean, even last night he was kind of putting it on himself, which I felt he looked gassed in the second half. I think he only had one field goal. His last field goal was at the 2:41 mark, and then he only took one more shot after that. And I just felt like, yes, they were doubling him and trying to force the ball out of his hands, but it just didn't seem like the normal LeBron we've been accustomed to, especially in the end of games where we've seen him, take over and win stretches in crunch time. And that's when he's been at his best, it feels like recently. So I felt like some of the wear and tear had started to get to him last night. But he even said, he's like, everyone else is stepping up with AD out. I have to do even more. And we're in the winning business. This is not the excuse. We're not making excuses here. Like we need to win, and we need to figure out how we're going to win without AD. So I think I could see him getting frustrated. Really the only guy to call it the team this season has been AD. After the Spurs loss, he said the defense was, I don't know if I could swear on here, but the defense was shit. And so like I think if AD's not playing, so I don't know if anyone's actually, I guess Kuz is the other guy I could see potentially calling them out. Like Kuz kind of has that attitude of even last night asking about the seeding, he was just very dismissive. Kuz I feel like can be a little dismissive sometimes, but I mean I don't, again though, I think this is what comes with being a defending champ. We see it, it's difficult to win that second title. It's usually more difficult to win the second title than the first one. And it's harder to be better in the second season. Like you see a lot of times, again, you go back, through Lakers history, whether it's the three-peat or the second championship, like you usually have a worse record in the repeat year, and it's usually a harder path in the playoffs. So, Golden State as well. So I think it's just one of those things where they also know that, Dennis is out, AD's out. I just wrote like the offensive rating without LeBron, Dennis, or AD on the floor is 98.1, which is just horrible.
That's terrible.
And then with Dennis and no AD or LeBron, so this is now going to be the Dennis lineups when LeBron is off the floor, when Dennis returns, 97 offensive rating. So like the offense really craters when LeBron is off the floor, no matter who's on there. And I think that's really the biggest challenge for this team, is just I don't know how you solve that, because it doesn't really matter what lineups Frank puts out there. They've all kind of struggled offensively.
I mean, the Lakers have really good players. Like, why are they struggling without LeBron, right? Like, even when it was AD, an AD-led lineup, they're not nearly as good as a LeBron-led lineup, right? Like, is it so? Frank is a tremendous defensive coach. Is part of it just that he's not as great an offensive coach, or is there simply no lineup they can put together that will allow them to excel without LeBron being out there?
So the base quartet that has done well without LeBron on the floor is Trez, AD, Dennis, and THT. Those four together, Dennis and Kuz. So those, if you look at it, those are probably their best four scorers after LeBron, right? Like if you're doing the top five scorers, those would be 4 of the 5, with LeBron being the 5th. Then that other spot is kind of fluctuated, whether it's THT, Alex, Wes, KCP. But those four are kind of the base for a good non-LeBron lineup. And I think it makes sense because, again, those are their next 4 best scorers. And they've really missed LeBron on the offensive end, not so much as the defensive end. I mean, I think part of it is just the lack of. I think the Lakers could do better with some more structure in the offense. I think there's too many times where it's just kind of swinging the ball around the perimeter, playing horseshoe offense, and maybe there's a breakdown. THT gets by someone, Trez gets a mismatch, and you exploit that. But I mean, LeBron is the ultimate cheat code where he can just make a good offensive possession happen, regardless of the defense, regardless of what's going on. So I think you've seen it a little bit with the second unit. Like I thought last night, the second unit was doing a lot of pick and rolls into second side actions, running more pick and rolls, and really looking and playing with a zip and a verve that the Lakers don't always play with. So I do think Frank has done a better job of implementing some of that stuff. But I'd like to see it with the starters because the starting group, and I don't know if that's just because LeBron maybe doesn't want as much structure and he wants to improvise, but the starting group goes through these lulls where, how many bad starts have they gotten off to in the past 2 weeks?
Too many.
It's just like, it's just like, what you guys got to fix that. So I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's just, again, LeBron wants to kind of control it and not have as much, structure or play calling, but that has not worked. And it feels like they are playing from behind in a lot of these games. So I think that's something to watch in just how they kind of manage that starting offense.
Yeah, so that's a perfect answer to what my segue to what my next question was going to be. Against the Nets and Miami, I don't know what is going on with that starting lineup, but they come out playing like ass in the first quarter, and then at the beginning of the third quarter, that same exact lineup, or pretty much close to that same exact lineup, ends up playing great and immediately goes on like a 9-0 run or a 7-0 run to start the third quarter. And I like to call it the 2-for-1 over halftime, where they try to get the shot at the end of the second quarter because they know they're going to get the possession at the beginning of the third. So like the Lakers last night, they made the shot at the end of the second, or against Miami, made the shot at the end of the second, but they missed the first shot at the beginning of the third. Like it's like an extended run sort of thing. But I don't know if it's an offensive thing or if it's just they're kind of starting off their games really lazy defensively. And then like the Miami game was a perfect example of that. Like they start Wes Matthews and they have two possessions where they play really, really great defense, like all 24 seconds of the clock. And then like Wes Matthews just happens to not remember to box out Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler gets two layups like out of those two putbacks out of that situation. So it's just like, are you seeing that same like weird energy shift where they're kind of lackadaisical in the first quarter, but then that same unit in the second half all of a sudden is picking it up and stuff like that? Is that? I don't think I've seen a team, or especially not the Lakers team, I haven't seen a team that does something like that. And it's so strange because when you see them do it in the third quarter, it's almost as if they're like, okay, let's play a little seriously so we don't get blown out by 20 and just make this a game. But then it's like, well, why not just do that at the beginning of the first so we don't go down in a hole to begin with? So is it like, they don't have the urgency, or, they're just kind of using the first quarter as cardio to warm themselves up? Because I know they don't get practices and stuff like that like normal. But what do you think is happening there?
Well, Kuz actually mentioned that last night, that he was like, we tend to ramp up during the game with our intensity and our pace and our approach. And we do tend to come out for whatever reason, lackadaisical, lack of urgency, and a little slow. And I think that's what, I mean, when you think about those like first quarter, the first 5-6 minutes, it's like, it's a lot of turnovers. It's, they get a rebound, they try to push the ball and they just throw it out of bounds or it gets stolen. Right. And then defensively, they get ran on. Like, it's clear that teams are game planning. And I know transition defense was an issue last season. And I don't know exactly where they rank off the top of my head this season, but it's been an issue where teams just ram the ball on them. Like it's Lakers miss, go back on the other end. You're going to get a basket in transition. So I do think it is like a warming up thing for them where it takes them 4 or 5 minutes to really get into a flow. But by that point, if they're playing a good enough team, they can be down 8, 10, 12 points in the first quarter. And that's gotten into some of these holes. So I wondered if starting Kuz would change that, in this AD list stretch, because Kuz is someone that's brought a lot of energy. And while I think he's actually played with the energy, it hasn't really infected the unit as a whole. So I personally, I think at this point, I'd like to see Alex start for Wes or KCP and go with a lineup of Mark, Kuz, LeBron, Wes or KCP, and then Alex, just to kind of, insert some life defensively, another guy who gets out in transition, and just another ball handler, because I think going from AD and Dennis to Kuz and Wes is a big drop off playmaking wise, ball handling wise, scoring wise, right? Like, you're not really getting like Kuz can do some of what AD can do, obviously not, anywhere close to that level, but Wes and Dennis are just totally different players. So I think starting Alex and then starting to stagger his minutes with LeBron, that might be more effective, because right now it is kind of like one of those lineups. It's almost in a way kind of like the lineup of Meh, where it's just LeBron and guys who aren't going to handle the ball, and I think that's why they've had some of these offensive struggles.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think a good point that you're making is that there's too much skill redundancy. Like if you have KCP, Wes, and Kuzma, you've got 3-3-and-D guys and only one true ball handler. And then I guess that also compounds that bench issue, because then you have THT and Caruso coming in, which are two on-ball handler type guys, not necessarily 3-and-D guys. And now you don't know who's supposed to handle what possession and what the designated role is. Like we've seen Caruso be good and then struggle to some degree. So I don't know. That's a pretty good idea. It may make more sense to swap them out so you have more distinct roles for guys on the floor as opposed to so much of the overlap that they're having right now. Yeah, that's a good point.
Jovan, I think the Lakers have largely out-talented everybody else in the NBA this season. And I think they've only practiced like 9 times. You probably would know much better than I would. I think they've only practiced like 9 times. And, they haven't had a whole lot of adversity, right? I mean, AD all of a sudden gets hurt, and he's got to be out for a month. And then we expect Dennis to play in the Nets game. We find out he's in the protocol stuff, and now he's going to miss another 3 games. And so now they've been hit with a bit of adversity. And it almost feels like they haven't built up the right habits to be able to, to stay afloat, which they will. They have LeBron. But it just that now they've hit adversity, it's almost like, well, what do we do? And I understand when you have LeBron, like you said, he's the ultimate cheat code. You can let him do whatever he wants. But there should be a foundational offense behind LeBron, right? Like when LeBron either isn't playing or he doesn't have it going, what are we doing to generate easy baskets? Because you can't always out-talent every team in the NBA. And it feels like they get caught up on that. Fans are talking about, Boogie Cousins, who just, got released by the Rockets, and, Blake Griffin, who may or may not get bought out, right? If either one of those guys are actually available for the Lakers, do you think they make sense? Does one make sense more than the other? Either without AD or even once AD is healthy, does either one of those guys really help the Lakers this season? Or is it someone else that you've heard whispers that you can tell us about?
I'm not a Boogie guy in this iteration of him. Boogie used to be one of my favorite players in the league. I'm a sucker for big men. Like I was a big man in high school. So like I'm always pro bigs. Like usually my favorite players in the league are bigs. But with him, I just go back to that 2019 Clippers Warriors series. And I remember talking to people on the Clippers staff, and they were obviously upset when he got hurt, just from like a human standpoint of, it sucks that he got hurt, but they were also upset because they wanted to target him defensively. And, the Clippers were very strategically running the Lou Trez pick and roll against Boogie Cousins and just torching him on that. And if you looked at the film, the defensive numbers, like he was very bad defensively, in that series. So I think my issue with it is just, yes, is there some maybe untapped offensive upside of, he's similar to Trez in offensive upside, but can space the floor, can hit threes, can maybe provide some more stretch. Like, yes, but I don't think he's better than Trez or Mark defensively. And that's been the number one complaint I've gotten on Twitter is, we need a JaVale or a Dwight type, a shot blocker, a rim protector, an athletic guy. Like Boogie's not that. So if you want the name, you want a former All-Star, like then that's a different topic. But if you're saying the Lakers need a rim protector, a guy who's going to be a vertical, athletic, big presence in the interior defensively, that's just not DeMarcus Cousins. So I think, he was on the team last season, and they would know better than any of us his fit in the locker room, his skill set, what they think he can bring. So, if they sign him, then it's probably based off of last season and what they saw. But I just think at this point, he is an offensive guy, a rebounder. And while that could have some value for the Lakers, I don't see him being a better defender than Mark or Trez at this point. Blake, I think, is interesting because he's a guy who you can't really rely on every night. But I still think that there have been some games this season, including against the Lakers, where he's looked like an all-star. And, you don't want him as the focal point of your offense. You don't want him as a guy you're playing 30 minutes a night. But if he basically took Keith's role and maybe a little bit of the Trez minutes, and it was like, okay, Blake, you're going to play 20, 22 minutes off the bench. You're going to run the second unit offense. It's going to be like you, Trez, Alex, THT, and Kuz as like a, lineup. And we'll get some LeBron in there. We'll get some AD in there. But he's a guy who can operate in the high post, mid post, the block. He can hit threes. Defensively, not, great. But I think like when you're thinking about what type of big would go great with Blake Griffin, it's Anthony Davis, right? Like Anthony Davis goes great with everybody, but like he specifically can cover for Blake as a rebounder, as a rim protector. So I think it's just basically an upside play. And at this point, I guess there are some similarities between Blake and Boogie, but Blake's just better at this stage of his career, and can still do more things offensively. So I'd be for them signing Blake. The other guy I'd look at is Andre Drummond. And, I don't know. I don't think that's realistic. I think he'd probably go to like Brooklyn or somewhere else where he'd have a bigger role. But that's the one guy where I think if he came in, he becomes the starting five. You shift some things, and Mark or Trez has to just take a reduced role. But when everyone says that they want a new center, I'm like, who's the guy that's actually better than Trez and Mark? Like, it's a nice theory, right? It's great in theory, but unless JaVale or Dwight becomes available or someone else, Dwayne Dedmon's been sitting out there. The Lakers haven't signed him, so for whatever reason, they don't want to sign him, or they're waiting to sign him. So I don't see who that guy is. And until that guy pops up on the free agent market, you can complain about it, but I think the reality is they have AD who can play the five. They have even Keith who could play the five in small lineups. And then you have Trez and Mark who I think will have reduced roles in the playoffs. So I don't think these issues are as big as some fans are making them to be.
So I think you're right. I think probably what's also compounding this situation is that the 12 minutes a game that AD would normally be playing center and stuff like that, not having him on the floor there, are 12 crucial minutes of quality basketball we're just missing out on when he plays that role. So I think that definitely probably makes things a little bit difficult. I think I'm probably in the same boat. Like I don't know if Cousins really is a solution in any degree. I think it's just a little more redundancy with Mark. Like I don't see what he offers in regard to that. Trez has actually been really good against like undersized centers. And when they had Trez out there against like Daniel Tice last night, he was pretty good against Adebayo, like even in isolation post-ups and stuff like that. It's pretty clear that when you allow him, when you reduce like the amount of thinking that he probably has to do with your defensive scheme and allow him to just like, we're switching everything. So just guard whoever's in front of you. He can be successful in that situation because we've seen him be able to strip smaller guards on drives and stuff like that, and then hold his own against bigger guys. Obviously, he's not ideal against a guy like Jokic or the more savants with the ball and stuff like that, MVP caliber guys. But there is one guy that I have been watching this season, and I was paying particular attention to against the Nets. And after watching him against the Nets, and you mentioned him earlier, after watching him against the Nets, I was like, dude, this guy needs to take a break because I don't know what's going on with him, but he is a magnet for elbows to the face. And that's KCP. I don't know what is going on with him, but this dude takes shots to the face. Every single game, it seems like he's getting elbowed in the face or he collides with somebody who ends up slapping him in the face. Somebody gets a rebound, the off arm goes off somewhere, he gets hit in the face. But I've seen him wear the back brace. He wears it when he's sitting down on the sidelines and stuff like that when he's not in the game. He turns his ankle from time to time trying to run through screens. He has been getting hammered. When I say hammered, I mean like I see him topple over like 2-3 times a game. getting hammered by some of the screens that he does. And it seems like, the first half of the game, I tweeted out, I was like, look, he just doesn't look right. Like it seems like the minutes and this this turnaround and stuff like that is really catching up to his body. And it makes sense because he has to run through so many screens. He's chasing around guys like Duncan Robinson and Joe Harris and all these different shooters and stuff like that. My concern with him has been, I think he needs a break, and I think the Lakers need to give him a break because clearly, I think somebody mentioned he has like an Iron Man thing where he like just wants to keep playing. And for me, it's just like this guy needs a break because he's clearly like it's affecting his shot. Like he's passing at wide open threes. Earlier in the season, he was attempting layups, like trying to collide with guys to draw fouls and missing point blank layups. Like my thing is just, have you seen that? Have you seen like kind of where I'm really surprised because he's like Mr. Dependable to some degree, and he's really turned around what he's been. But like first half of that Miami game, he doesn't look good. All of a sudden, second half of the Miami game, he looks great. And I was just like, well, what's going on with this guy? Like, and so are you seeing that like with KCP also, that he's having some trouble just because, and because of the turnaround of the season? Like, I feel like we're getting to a point where he may actually get hurt, like, and miss significant time because of how much, kind of like how it happens with Caruso, where he gets hurt and then he has to sit out like 3-4 games. I feel like we're just lucky that hasn't happened to him. Are you seeing something like that with him or no?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point on the him being tired. I hadn't really thought of that, that in depth. I thought that, that would kind of be an issue for most of the guys who played deep into the bubble, but I hadn't thought of it in that way. And I think when you present that case, I think it makes a lot more sense because it was weird how he's had this stark of a drop off. Kind of looking at his first 10 games or so that he played. Mm-hmm. And then since then, he's just been shooting the ball horribly. And, he had the really hot start, was 57% 3-point shooting. And since then, has been, I think, like mid 30s. So, I mean, and he almost did get hurt in the Brooklyn game. I tweeted it out during the timeout that he kind of toppled over at half court and then went back to the locker room and ended up returning to that game and was fine. But I think it's tough, especially with AD and Dennis being out, because I don't think anyone's going to want to rest right now. And I think he's also not. It's one thing when you're playing like mid to high 30s minutes, because then you could kind of point to it and be like, okay, that's like a ridiculous amount of minutes. But when you're in that like 25, 28 minute zone for the most part, it can be ridiculous for a guy who's overworked, but for the most part, like just saying that amount of minutes on its own isn't that crazy. Mm-hmm. So I think he's probably a guy who's going to benefit a lot from the All-Star break. When looking at like, if I'm the Lakers, I might have some walkthroughs or, guys are going to go on vacation. Kuz already said he's going to the beach for a few days. So, like guys, you got to let guys have a break. But when they come back, that like Thursday or Friday, like I would just go through walkthroughs and, go through your 5-on-0 sets and whatever you want to implement. But these guys need a break. And I think KCP is one. I think, Mark is a guy who's been up and down, I feel like physically, and that's probably more to do with age, but he's looked much better some nights than other nights. And LeBron needs a break. Yeah. Like I think LeBron needs a game off. They're probably not going to do that, but I think he of anybody needs as much of a break because his workload, look at the last 3 games. This is like a concern for me. Played 38 minutes, played 33 against Brooklyn, but that was only because that game was out of hand. He exited with 5 minutes left. Had that game been close, he would have played 38 minutes again and then played 37 last night. Like that's just too much for LeBron to be playing right now, especially if they're losing these games. So I don't know if they need to give him a minutes limit or what, but you don't want to, overwork a 36-year-old. We've seen that movie before. It doesn't end well. So I think the Lakers got to be really diligent about how they use LeBron.
I mean, could you say the same thing about the Anthony Davis situation? And I'm not pointing fingers at the Lakers. I know a lot of fans want to point fingers everywhere that they can. But could Anthony Davis maybe have gotten more of a break before this injury happened. He already missed games, but given his history, given that apparently the really bad injury he sustained in the finals that he kept playing on, or in the playoffs he kept playing on, should they maybe have given him a few more games off prior to him actually getting hurt?
It's tough because I spoke with Dr. Rajpal Brar at 3CB Performance, and he had said that there is that he knows some people on the Lakers medical staff. He trusts them, and obviously for AD to be cleared to return, he would have had to go through a series of tests and exams to test out his Achilles and his calf and his leg. And in that case, like, resting wouldn't necessarily have been the best thing for him, and that there could actually be downside to resting a player. So I'm not a doctor. I don't know. I don't fully understand the kind of understanding or science behind that. But so from hearing that, it changed my perspective, because I'm with you guys. Because what I thought was really interesting in that whole situation was, after the Memphis game, AD said, someone asked him, is this something that's going to linger? Do you have to deal with this the rest of the season? Like, what's kind of the long-term implications of this? And he was like, well, the one way to kind of fix it would be to rest, but I'm not going to rest. Like, I want to win. I'm competitive. My team needs me. They pay me to play. I'm not going to sit games out. And the very next game, he ends up re-aggravating the injury, and then now is out for 4+ weeks. So, but then he was asked about it, and he kind of hedged and was like, well, no, I felt better. This was the best I'd felt. They cleared me. So I think it's probably somewhere in the middle, where like maybe they brought him back a little too early. He could have maybe sat out another game or two. But I don't think it was some egregious error where it was like they were telling him to play through an injury, and it just ended up, biting them. Because the truth is, like, I think the Lakers have the perspective that at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter what seed they are. If they're the 3 seed, the 4 seed, the 5 seed, like, I don't see them being, I think 5 seed's like the absolute worst case scenario. I don't see them going any lower than that. I think realistically, like, a 3 seed is maybe more realistic. But as long as AD is healthy, again, as we started this episode, like, they can beat anybody. But if AD is not healthy, you're kind of screwed. So I don't think they would take that risk if he wasn't cleared and they weren't confident that he could play. Like, I just think that's way too short-sighted, and they deserve the benefit of the doubt, because I just don't think they would do that.
Yeah, I'd say I'm probably in agreement with Jovan. Like, I appreciate the professional chivalry of Anthony Davis and his insistence on playing basketball for the Lakers, but you won us a championship, so it's okay. That pressure isn't necessarily there the same way it probably was last year, because of all the noise the more national media was making in regards to, oh, now you got to win immediately because you're playing next to LeBron and all that sort of stuff. I do agree with you that I would hope, Vogel has mentioned that he does look at Phil Jackson, and he pays attention to some of his coaching techniques and just perspective and stuff like that. And I remember the second year after Kobe and Shaq won their first championship, they weren't as good. And I think Shaq on the national broadcast mentioned himself that during the regular season, they were a terrible defensive team. The second year after him and the third year during the regular season after him and Kobe had won. And we know what the story is after that. They just completely ran through a bunch of teams in the playoffs. And so, and I think to some degree, we have to kind of look around the league and see what's happened too as well. Like, KD, COVID, he goes into COVID protocol, comes back one game, tweaks his left hamstring, which can become a recurring issue later if he doesn't rest it. Paul George has a bone edema or something like that at the bottom of one of his feet. And then I think I was reading one of the beat writers. They asked him, like, oh, what happened? He's just like, oh, because they're playing so many games in a given week, and like it's like every other day they're playing another game. Something, there was some swelling in his foot or something like that. And he's been having a tremendous year as well. So it's not just exclusive to just AD. It seems like all players around the league to some degree, because of the consolidated season and all that sort of stuff, they're running into injuries. The guys that get hit by COVID, they're barely catching up. Jimmy Butler's an example. Jason Tatum said that he could barely breathe. Like, he was completely winded after recovering from COVID protocol. and that derailed a lot of the Celtics season so far. So I feel like this season is one of those things where you can't look at historical data and you can't look at like historically how teams are run, and you have to completely like just say we got to take this one day at a time, one game at a time. And I think you're right, Jovan. Like you just the Lakers have to just be smart about it. Like you make the playoffs, it's fine. Like that's really all it is. You just got to make it. My sense has been they just got to make it in there healthy. That's really all that matters as it relates to this regular season. Obviously, chemistry and our offensive defensive chemistry is important, but health is really the most important thing. I won't be surprised if the Lakers drop to like a 4 or 5 seed if the teams above them are trying to get out of their bracket. I don't think anybody is going to want to play the Lakers in the second round. I think teams like the Clippers or the Jazz, they would rather play them in the Western Conference Finals if they hold on to like those 1, 2 seeds and stuff like that. So we saw that a little bit last year where, the word was that teams were trying to set up the brackets so the Lakers would have the most difficult schedule, and that didn't work out in their favor. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same thing this year. That's just how talented the team can be. I don't have any follow-up questions personally myself. Like I think you've answered so many of the good stuff. I'm going to be very curious to see how they respond. Washington, I think, is on a 4-game win streak coming in on Monday. A lot of national media has talked a lot about Bradley Beal's pouting and stuff like that, but they're not a bad team. It's just a team that's been decimated by injuries and COVID. And I'm very curious to see how the Lakers respond to that team because they're a fast team. And you were right. I think I agree with you there too. You mentioned that teams are trying to run on the Lakers. They're trying to play as fast as possible. Against Miami, we were watching I forget who it was, Max Struss or Gabe Vincent. Like they're like leading the break for the Heat. I'm like, what is going on? Give the ball to Jimmy Butler. Why is this guy running the floor? But that's what they're trying to do. If the Lakers miss a layup, they're trying to get advantages, 4-on-3s or 5-on-3s or 5-on-4s. And that's just going to be the way teams try to attack the Lakers. They're going to try to speed the game up because they know we have older guys or bigger guys and an interior mindset. So I'm going to be curious to see what happens if they go 500 or what it is. But I'm sure Lakers Twitter will give us a somewhat accurate temperature check depending on the quality of the games as it comes through. So for me personally, I appreciate you jumping on, Jovan. I'm going to see if I can possibly make it out to another game and maybe we can run into each other again. But, I appreciate you joining and hopping on and sharing your thoughts on the Lakers.
Jovan, this is my last question and we'll get you out of here. The league has not released the second half of the schedule yet. I don't know if it's completed. I assume that it would be, but maybe they're still tweaking it. Given all the players having to sit out because of COVID protocols, given how many games have been canceled, and given what Vinay just said, all these players saying, hey, we're playing so many games, in a short span, we're dealing with injuries that we might not otherwise have been dealing with. Do you think any of that goes into account when they release or they finish up the second part of the schedule, or maybe they spread out a few more games and give guys an extra day's rest or something? Or do you think it's just business as usual? What we got from the first half of the schedule, we should expect for the second half.
It sounds like it's business as usual, and that's kind of scary because there's like 4 or 5 teams that have had multiple games postponed, and they now have to make up. So, they already had a pretty condensed, it's almost every other day type schedule. Now you have 4, 5, 6 teams that you're trying to fit in, 40 games, 41 games in this, stretch that's supposed to be for 36. So I don't envy the schedule makers. I don't know how they're going to do that for, the Washingtons, the Memphises, like those teams that have missed multiple games. From the Lakers, I mean, that's one of the pros of the season that you can say that they have not had a game postponed. And, part of that is luck because even if they were perfect, if they were playing an opponent that had some sort of situation happen, obviously that would just postpone the game. So they've been fortunate in that regard. And that's something that I think can't be overlooked. And, I know the Lakers the rest of the way are supposed to have one of the easier schedules. I don't know exactly where they rank in strength of schedule, but I think they're supposed to have one of the 10 easiest schedules in the second half of the year. So that's something that's encouraging. And that's where I think, like, again, in the short term, there might be some pain. There might be a 2-4 stretch, a 3-3 stretch. Like last season, it took them 50 games to get their 12th loss. If they went 3-3, it would take them 37 games, or depending on when the third loss was, 35, 36, 37 games to get that 12th loss. So
I just want to remind folks that around this time last week, we were in the middle of a 4-game losing streak without Anthony Davis too. I think we were like in Indiana and stuff like that, and there was nothing but panic. Everybody's like, "Oh, this is the real Lakers, 0-4 on the road right now. This is what this real team is." So it's somehow this team has done pretty well, losing a few games here and there, but you're right. You got to zoom out a little bit and look at the macro perspective of this whole thing. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one thing I'm very interested in is more so the other teams, because I felt like last season there was a clear tier of the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Bucks, and then everybody else. And it was like one of those 3 teams was going to win the title. Most people thought it was one of the 2 LA teams. And then obviously we saw it played out. This season, I feel like that pool might be a little bit bigger. I think, depending on how you view Milwaukee, maybe they're in there or not, but I think it's the Clippers. I think the Jazz, I don't really buy the Jazz as a legit contender, but you can't really ignore the 24-6 record and winning 20 of your last 22. Like they're just on an insane stretch right now. So at some point, if they continue this, you got to take them seriously, or at least seriously as the third team in the West. Then you have Philly and Brooklyn, where Embiid is at an insane level that we haven't really seen since Shaq from a center, as far as a low post guy. And then you have Brooklyn, who has 3, I think, top 15 players in the league, at least on the offensive end. So that this pool, I think, is a little bit deeper. So if there's one, throw out seeding, throw out concerns about injuries and stuff. If there's one thing that gives me a little concern, it's just that I think the top of the league might be a little bit deeper and better this season than last season. So I think their path ultimately might be a little bit harder to repeating, but that's, comes with the territory. And I think this team, again, would be favored over any of those teams in a 7-game series. And it's just, I'm interested to see how legitimate is Philly, how legitimate is Utah. Does Brooklyn add someone and make themselves more formidable? What's up with the Clippers and Paul George's health? These are the things I'm more interested versus the Lakers. I think regardless, we know what we're getting from them. We know the seeding doesn't matter as much. It's just more of how do they match up with the rest of the league?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that the pool is probably a little bit bigger, at least in a regular season. But to your point, I don't think anybody would take the Jazz in the 7-game series over the Lakers, and probably not over the Clippers as well. Generally, championships come down to who has the best player on the court or the best set of players on the court. And this kind of reminds me of the Lakers three-peat with Shaq and Kobe, where they had to deal with teams like Portland and the Kings, and they were really, really good, but they didn't have a Shaq and a Kobe. They didn't have one Shaq or Kobe, let alone both of those guys. And even when Kobe and Powell's Lakers went back-to-back, I mean, they had to deal with Melo's Nuggets, and I remember Houston was really good one year. But, if you've got the best guy, I mean, you don't want to bet against that. And so LeBron is still playing at a ridiculous level, even though he's in year 18 and he's tired. He does look tired some nights. He's still probably the best player in the NBA. And I don't know how much I believe in even Giannis right now, man. I mean, the Bucks are really good. I mean, they're a good team, but I don't think they get past Philly or Brooklyn. I just, if Philly's healthy, and to your point, Embiid is looking like a monster, and at least offensively with the Nets, I don't know how you deal with that 3-headed monster. I mean, they might give up 150, but they're probably going to score 151. So they're going to be hard to deal with. So, but that's all I got for you, man. Thank you as always for coming on. We really appreciate your insight since you're so close to the team. Everybody, I retweeted Jovan's article on Twitter. You can follow him at Jovan Buha on Twitter and on Instagram. But his article talking about the Lakers' adversity, you can find it under his Twitter handle or under mine. I sent that out. But Jovan, thank you, man. We really appreciate you.
Thank you guys so much for having me. We'll have to do this again soon.
Yes, sir. Thank everybody for watching or listening to Lakers Central.